Okay, now that we have some animations to play with, it's time to look at how the animation controller operates. So if I go ahead and open up the animation controller for our robot that we were just playing with, you'll notice that we have two states in here. We have the idle robot state, which was the first state we created, the first animation clip, and we have the panic robot. And it makes sense that when we enter the scene, from the entry point, we will end up with the idle animation. Here's our animator state. We would like to animate and change from the idle to the panic. It's entirely possible that if, say, for a warning gets detected, that you would transition from the idle to the panic state. So we're going to add a transition by right-clicking on the initial state, say make transition. That'll give us this arrow, and we're going to transition from the panic or from the idle to the panic. And then it's also entirely possible when the warning is over that you would transition back from the panic to the idle. So there's a lot of times it will end up with a transition to and from a state. So in order to control these with software, in other words, in our code, we might be able to say, oh, a warning has been detected, so we want to turn on the warning animation. We need some parameters. So if you go over here in the list on the left, there's a thing called parameters, and I've already created this one called panic. But you can add one just by giving it a name and click plus. And it's going to ask you, is this a floating point number, an integer, a Boolean, or a trigger? And in my case, I'm going to call it a Boolean. If it's true, I want the robot to be in panic mode. And if it's false, I want it to go back to idle. So I'm going to make it a Boolean. And it didn't name it right. So I can rename it here if I wanted to, panic 2, for example. And I can now associate that variable with these transitions. So I can go into this transition and highlight the one that would go from idle to panic and say, hey, I want that to happen under the condition that I'll go with panic 2 is true. And then the other transition, I want that to happen when panic 2 is false. So if I just change that parameter from true to false, so if I go and turn it on, I'll be in panic mode. If I turn it off, I'll be in idle robot mode. So what we can do is we can pull this window out so that we can see it. We'll move it over here. Actually, maybe we can just bury it over here somehow. We'll add it over there. Okay, so um, there's my animator and my scene over here. So I can go ahead and play my game here. And there's my robot. And right now you can see, although it's kind of small, you can see the pupil pulsing. So it must be in idle state. Let's see if I can zoom in here a little bit. All right. So you can see that the eyeball is pulsing. And if I turn Panic 2 on, it will switch into my animation for Panic. And then if I switch it off, it'll go back to idle. But see, we notice a problem. It retained the black pupil from Panic, so I have to go back into my animation, my idle animation, and control the color of that pupil so that it's exactly the way I want it to be. So I want to actually set that back to the color of the object when we start. And so if I hit Panic again, it goes back into Panic mode, and when I turn it off, it goes back into idle animation. All right, so let's go fix that animation clip. So here's my idle animation. So I'm going to double click that and it will bring up the animator. And right now we are controlling just the scale of the pupil. But let's go ahead and add in the property. Let's go ahead and add in the property. Now you'll notice I had to click over here in my hierarchy to get so I had to click my robot so I could get control of that property again. And I'm going to go in here to my pupil, head, eye, pupil, and I'm going to add that sprite renderer color again. And at the initial frame of this animation, I want it to all be ones. And then I'm also worried that the background color of the eye might accidentally be in a red state if I transition. So I'm going to add the property of that eye and the sprite renderer color. And I'm going to make it white as well. So I think I should be in pretty good shape for this transition to be safe. In other words, it will always transition back to what I expect it to be. So let's go ahead and hit play again and see if it behaves the way we want. All right, I'm in the idle state, and you can see over here in my animator, it's showing me that I'm currently looping my animation state idle, and you can see in my scene that it is in fact pulsing. If I then hit panic 2, it transitions in my animator. You can see that over on the right that it's now looping the panic mode, and it's small black iris with or pupil with the white and red alternating. If I then uncheck panic, it should go back to an idle state, which is with the blue again, which is good, and the white background. So if I was just in my code able to change this panic setting on or off, that's all I need to do to change the animation that's currently playing. And so you can do all sorts of things with parameters like that. You could have a parameter that's based off how fast you're traveling, in which case you'd use a float parameter. You could have animation based on how much ammo you have. So if your ammunition gets to 0, you play the reload ammunition ammo. Reload ammunition animation, etc. All right, great.